Hi, welcome back. Recently, I released a video where I'm showcasing how you can sync two SharePoint lists with each other. That works also pretty nicely, and if you have one SharePoint list, which will be then your master list, then you can create an item there or update it. The workflow will check in the second list if the item already exists. If yes, it will update it. If no, it will create a new item. But unfortunately, that's it. You cannot do much more with this solution because you are bound to that trigger, which is in one SharePoint list. And if you want to create or update something in the second list, you cannot trigger the same workflow to do the same thing in the first list. So you have to create a second workflow. And then you have to somehow figure out how can I make these two workflows that they don't interrupt each other or I don't land in an infinite loop. And we don't have to talk about having 3 or 4 SharePoint lists because with the current features, it's almost impossible. But there is another way how we can do that. And that's what we're going to take a look at today. But first, if you like the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up. And yeah, thanks for watching. As you can see, the solution is called Encodian. I stumbled upon Encodian when I was searching for a way how to have only one Power Automate flow that will be triggered from different SharePoint lists, and it will do exactly what one static Power Automate trigger cannot do, which means you can then dynamically trigger that from multiple lists and then get the items from depending on from which list you trigger the workflow. But let's take a look how this works. Before doing that, let me explain real quick what Encodian is. Encodian is a company which produces products, as you can see, around Power Automate and Power Platform in general, like Flower, Filer, Indexer, Trigr, and Inverter. So what I'm interested in is Trigr, which allows you to deploy flows across SharePoint. This means you have one flow and then you can decide on which SharePoint sites or you can decide it should be triggered from all SharePoint sites. Okay, so that's it around Encodian, but let's take a look how we can install our trigger in our SharePoint site or SharePoint environment. I have already opened here the documentation around Trigr and let's go through it real quick together. So to do so, I'm going to open these two windows in parallel and we can go through it real quick. So first what I did is I went to the Encodian Trigr sign up form and then I created a trial account. You need that so that we can create the trigger at the Encodian website. Then I downloaded this Trigr package. It's an app package which we need to install in our SharePoint environment. I went to my admin center of my SharePoint. This is very easy. You have this template here, and you only need to swap this part with your tenant prefix. Mine is also here, as you can see, and I just swap that in here. And when you are in your admin center, it's here very nicely explained. You have to go to more features, which I am already there, and locate the app section and select open, which is over here. I'm selecting open. This will open a new tab. After it has loaded, it says click upload. As you can see here, I've already installed the app for my SharePoint, but in your case, after downloading it from here, you can upload it here as well. And after doing so, you will be prompted with this table here, or this form, and it will ask you if you want to make this app available fully for a selected number of lists, or you want to have this for all your sites, which means if you make it available only for your site owners, this will mean that the site owners of the SharePoint sites can decide if they want to have this app available inside of their sites or not. The second option, which I also chose for this demonstration, means that it is deployed to all my sites. Then I have to click close and enable the app, of course, first. Click close and then it is there. And he is now showing how it looks like in the SharePoint. And I can also do that. Let me grab my SharePoint list, which we are going to see how that works. And here, if you select one item, it should be here, actions. Let me make this a little bit bigger, and you can see it here, which is very practical. Of course, you need to select one item to be able to trigger. And let me make this bigger again. Okay, so the documentation continues here and shows us how we can create a trigger workflow in Power Automate. And I will post this link in the video description, but we will not go through this anymore. But you can see here, it is very well documented. I also used it to create my workflow, at least for the beginning. And yeah, you can get some inspiration here. The interesting part is when you have to deploy your Power Automate flow to all SharePoint sites. How to do that is you need to go to the Encodian website, to the account portal. Mine is already here, and let me open that in parallel here. And what it says is that you can go then to the Encodian Trigr, which is a product. We have here the different products like Flower, Trigr, and Indexer, and then go to the configuration. So it says here, add an action. To add an action, you can click there and it will ask you for a description, and it will also ask you which Power Automate workflow you want to use. That's why it's saying that you have to create the workflow first, because then you have to select it here. If you don't have the workflow, you will not be able to find it here. So always create the workflow first, even if it's just the trigger part. No? If it's just only the beginning here, this part here. So that will be sufficient. And then you can go back to your Power Automate workflow and continue building it. So here you can select the workflow, you can give it a title, description, and also a run message. Let me cancel that and take a look at my action here. So as you can see, I have already selected my workflow since it's already built, and I have a description here. And let's write here a run message which says lists are syncing. Yeah. And I'm going to update that. Let's go back to editing. And here you can select if this action that we have created here needs to be appear in lists or also libraries. You can also select both. I'm going to keep it to lists since I'm only wanting to use it in my SharePoint lists. Next, we have the form configuration. If you're familiar with instant cloud flows or instant flows in Power Automate, you know that you can also put some fields which the user can fill out when they are triggering the workflow. Similar here, you can create your own fields. You can give them a type, which checkbox, people picker, whatever. And you can say if it's required or not. You can sort them out, and you can even add more. So this, when the user will trigger the workflow, they will be asked to fill out these fields. And these fields then will be passed to the workflow and then can be used there for whatever logic you might need or come up with. Next, we have security, where we can add some Active Directory group names. And last, we have the site management. In my case, I have here my SharePoint URL, which means that this action can be triggered from all the sites. I can even say here site specific and write the list names. So let's cancel that and let's take a look how I build this Power Automate workflow. So let's take a look at the SharePoint lists first. So my scenario says that I have 3 SharePoint lists. One is called PMO, the other one is called PMO Marketing, and the third one is called PMO Sales. What you need to do first is you need to decide which list will be your, let's call it master list, because you need to grab the ID of that item and save it to the other SharePoint lists so that you can always find that item that has been edited or created, and you need that ID. In my case, I decided to go with PMO. That's why you can see here this ID column. In the other 2 lists, I have created a new column called Master ID. The ID, similar like in the PMO, is also here, is the standard ID column that you always get when you create a new SharePoint list. And when I will create an item here in my PMO list, I want this ID to be filled in this column. So since I cannot edit this column, I'm going to write it in a new column called master ID. And as you can see, this has 1457, 1457, and so on and so forth. So this item have already been synced. So that's why I have here a master ID and here not. Okay, so there are a couple of issues when doing it this way, which we're going to cover up in the workflow. Let's take a look there. Okay, so we have now when a user runs a trigger. This trigger brings us a couple of options. In the first option, I'm saving the library list name in a variable called var list name. And as you can see here, we have a couple of fields that we get when we trigger this workflow from Trigr. We have the site address, the library list ID, library list name, form fields, which were those forms that you can configure. And we have the user email address, the file identifier, or the file identifiers. This is in case you are triggering it from a library. And the item or items. The item will give you the selected list item or the first selected list item from an items array. So if you have multiple items, here it will be say the first one, and here will be the array with all the item numbers. So if I open one of my latest runs, we can take a look how that is bringing the data into the workflow. So this flow ran successfully, and we can see here that I triggered the workflow from the sales marketing site. This is the list ID, and the name is PMO sales. The item that was triggered was 20, and that's my email address. And here are the items, which means if I have only one item, it will show here as well. If I have two or more items, here it will be the list of the items, and here will be always the first from the list. The file identifiers are empty because there are no files there. They are just SharePoint list items. Okay, so as I said, I'm initializing here the variable with a list name. Next, I'm initializing a variable with a site name. And next, I'm creating here a variable called item ID. So in my case, to explain to you why I'm using these two initialized variables here, in my case, I'm using 3 SharePoint lists. So I copied the site address and the list names of those 3 SharePoint lists and statically inserted them here in 2 arrays. You can also do this dynamically by getting the site names with an HTTP request maybe, but in my case, I want to keep it a little bit simpler, and I pasted them here in an array. Also similar, their list names. Because I want later on to check, okay, which SharePoint list was this flow triggered from. And if it was triggered from PMO, I want to update or edit or maybe create a new item in the other two. Now, that's why I'm going to use these 2 arrays here, and I'm going to filter them based on the item that has been triggered from. Okay, so the next steps, I'm filtering these 2 arrays, the filter site or the site array and the list array. So what I'm saying is that from the variables list of SharePoint sites, the item is not equal to var site name. So this item, imagine that this list of sites, no, is this table here. And the item means that this filter array action will go through each item. In my case are 3 items, and it will go through each of those 3 items, and it will remove if it's not equal to the var site name. Or better said, it will keep everything that is not equal to the variable site name. And at the end, if my SharePoint list where I trigger the flow from is PMO, it will only keep these 2. The same thing we'll do also with the SharePoint site. Next, we're moving into the apply to each. Let me close this. Okay, so we are now in the apply to each. Why? Because I'm going to get the items from the SharePoint list that was triggered. Because as I showed you here, when the flow is triggered, we only get the site address, list name, and the item or the item IDs. But we don't know what's inside those items. So if we want to create an item in another list or to update an item, we need to have the fields. No? What fields are in those items? So I need to get those items. And in get items, since it's returning a table, it will create an apply to each loop. So here I have these custom values. And as you can see here, I'm passing the site address and the list name. No? And I have here also a filter query, which says, give me the item with the ID equals the current item. The current item is coming from Trigr outputs body items. So what it says, give me the items from PMO sales that has the ID 20. If there are multiple items, that's why we have the apply to each. So now it gets tricky because I want to create a conditional ID. So what I'm doing here, I'm saying if the variables var list name equals PMO, if the current list is the PMO list, then get the from the body the ID. Otherwise, if the master ID is empty, then write a 0. And if that's also not the case, then grab the master ID. So let me explain this in the SharePoint list. So I have here in PMO. PMO has an ID column. When I create something here, it has an ID, of course. And then it will go here and it will create the item with the master ID being the ID from the main list. But what happens if I create an item in PMO marketing? The ID is this one here, but I want the master ID so that to be able to sync it with the other two. But when I create an item, I don't have a master ID because the master ID is being created in the master list. So the master ID will be blank or 0. That's why I am checking here if this PMO, then grab the ID. If it's another list, then grab the master ID. But if this master ID is empty, please write 0 because I cannot leave it blank. Otherwise, I will have problems when I'm going to get the items to check if the item exists or not. Next, I'm going to generate this item. The problem is here why I'm doing this. Let me show you in a second here. When I'm creating or updating an item, as you can see, I have to pass this record. I have here another flow open. Normally, when you use update or create an item, you statically select the site address and the list name. And when you do that, Power Automate grabs the structure of that list and opens up this list of fields, which you can then use and populate. In my case, I am creating this item or updating it by using custom values, or better said, dynamic values. And as you can see here, I'm not saying which list or which site address that is. That's why Power Automate thinks, okay, the structure will always keep changing. So I'm not able to show the user the fields here, but I'm expecting the user to pass an item record. We'll take a look in a second what these custom values are. But that's why I'm creating these PMO and non-PMO items here. The reason why I have to generate two is because when I am creating an item in PMO, I don't have a master ID column. In PMO, there's no master ID column. It's just an ID column. So when I'm creating an item in the other SharePoint list, I have also a master ID column. That's why I will later on in the flow check if the list where I'm creating or updating is PMO, then use this item structure. Otherwise, use this one with a master ID. So now I'm splitting into two parallel actions. In these two parallel actions, I am getting the items from the second item list and from the third item list. And here I'm also using these dynamic values, which are very simple. So we have this filter array variable, and in that body, I'm grabbing the first item. So in my case, I am filtering here this array, sites and also the lists, and I'm filtering over here. And because my workflow was triggered from PMO sales, the sales and marketing site has been filtered out, and also the list name. As you can see here, this is the input and the output is this one here. So what I need to do then is I'm saying grab the first item from this body. In this case, the first item is PMO. For the third item, I'm grabbing the last item, which is PMO marketing in this case. And as you can see, here I'm grabbing the first, and here I'm grabbing the last. Now it's just grabbing the first and the last. If you have more than two other lists, for example, if you are syncing 4 or 5 SharePoint lists with each other, then this logic will be more complicated, of course. Okay, so next, after I specified the dynamic values for the site address and the list name, it's similar in both sites, I need to do a filter query. So in this case, I need to say, if the first item from this filter list is PMO, then grab the ID. Otherwise, grab the master ID. Because if the first item in those two remaining lists is PMO, then I need to grab the ID. Here is no master ID, that's why. Otherwise, grab the master ID, because the master ID is the one we specify which items are the same. No? This one is just, we ignored it. And yeah, if it's PMO, grab the ID. If it's not PMO or otherwise, grab the master ID. And that ID will be compared to the outputs from conditional item ID, the one we create here. And if we take a look in one of the runs, this item was triggered from PMO sales, and I think it was a newly created item. That's why it's writing 0. If it's a new created item, it will mean that the length of this get items, it will be equal to 0. So the length of the outputs get items body value is equal to 0. And we can see it here as well. Now, if I show the raw outputs, since I'm searching here for ID equal 0, the length of this get item second list body value is 0. It's counting the items in this array here. And if that's 0, it means that it has to create an item. If it's not 0, it means that there is already an item there and it needs to update it. So in this case, I'm giving a custom value here. Again, I'm giving the first item from the site list, and here also the first item from the SharePoint list names. And now is where the problem came up. As I told you, if you have dynamic values for site address and list name, you have to give a structure give a record. You don't get those fields like here. And we have generated our records here, as we explained before. And what I'm doing here is I'm telling if the first item is equals PMO, then grab the outputs from generate item PMO. Otherwise, grab the outputs from generate item non-PMO. So which means if that's PMO, grab this structure here, otherwise grab this one here. And the same here as well, with only difference that we have here also the ID. All we need to pass the ID for the item to update. And what I'm doing here is from this get items, from the body, I'm searching for the values, from the item index 0, and I'm grabbing the ID. why I'm doing this is to not use an apply to each, because otherwise get items or grabbing dynamic values from get items actions, it will always create an apply to each loop. And in this case, I can avoid that by telling it go into that get items response and grab from the values in the index 0 the ID. And the item, of course, is the same as this one here. If it's PMO, grab the PMO JSON, otherwise grab the non-PMO JSON. And the same thing is happening also from on this side. It's just here, the length is the same. Here is grabbing the same structure for update or also for create. The only difference is this one here, which is the last item from my array instead of the first item. Okay, so let's go through it real quick before we continue with the third condition, which is the final part. Because the error or the problem is when I create an item in PMO, I have the ID. So it's easy to populate the master ID because I already have it in the other two lists. But so that's the first scenario. The second scenario is when I edit an already synced item. For example, if I will edit this item here, I have the master ID. So what will happen is the flow will check in these two other lists if it's an item with ID number 4, this one here, for example, and here it will check if it's an item with master ID number 4, which is this one here. In both cases, it's equal to yes, and it will update those two items. But what happens if I create a new item in one of the other two SharePoint lists, which is not my master SharePoint list? So I will create this one here. Let's do that. Let's call it test category, test customer, test project. I should have come up with a list, with a shorter list, sorry. Let's do this really quick. Entity, value, doesn't matter, test. Master ID, of course, you need to hide it. In this case, it's still there, but you need to hide it, so the user should not be able to edit that. Okay, so let's save this. So that's where the error comes up, because as you can see, I have an ID, which is automatically generated, but what I don't have is a master ID. So if I trigger this now, it will create the items in these two sections here, and it will not have a master ID. So that means if I don't have this last part, which I'm going to show in a second what it does, and I trigger this now, and it will run until here, it will see that this item is new, and it will create it once in the PMO and once in this third list. But the master ID, which is coming from PMO, it will not be populated here because this list does not know what the master ID is, which is at this point not a problem. But later, if you want to edit this, you will not be able to edit it. It will always create a new item. Why? Because editing, it checks if this item already exists in the other lists. And since this will be written 0, it will always be seen as a new item. So what I need to do if I create a new item in a list which is not my master list, if I create a new item in this PMO marketing or in PMO sales, I need to go into my master list after it has been synced, the item has been created, grab the last created item, grab its ID, and populate it here as a master ID in those two other lists. And that's exactly what I'm doing here in this condition. So what I'm doing here is I'm checking if the library list name from where Trigr was triggered is equal to PMO. Because if it's equal to PMO, I don't have to do this. That will mean that we already have an ID and we have just populated the master ID. We don't have a master ID if we start from these other two lists. So that's the first condition. The second condition is if that conditional item ID that we are creating here, if that is not equal to 0. Because if it's equal to 0, it means that the item is newly created. So if this all result to false, these two conditions, it will go down this way. And what here happens is that I'm getting the items from my main list. And here's the first time that I'm using static site address and list name. Why? Because if this flow goes down this path, I know that the flow was triggered from another SharePoint list except of PMO. So I can go to my PMO list and I can grab here my, I do a get items, and I want to order these items ID descending, which means the highest number at the top, and give me the top one, so the first item from that descending list. In that case will be the last created item. And what I need to do next is I need to create this JSON, this short JSON here, with a master ID. So this one has then the outputs from these get items, and from the body I grab the ID, which is the ID of that latest item in my master list. And this has the structure, or this is like a record with one column, and this will be then passed into the update item action. So this update item action, which is coming next, is from the site that has been triggered. No? It's from the site address and the SharePoint list that triggered this workflow. And I also have the item ID here, because if I trigger it from PMO marketing, I already know that, since Trigr will give this information to Power Automate. And I want to update this column here. And I know that item ID, and I'm going to pass the outputs from that have been generated here with the item ID from my master list. So I'm updating the master ID. Next, what I'm doing is, let me copy this into my OneNote, into my notepad. And what I'm doing here, I hope this is readable. What I'm doing here is I'm checking if this SharePoint site is not equals the item and also not equals the site that was triggered. Which means we have here the list of SharePoint sites, and we are filtering we're filtering out the SharePoint site that was that triggered the workflow, and also PMO, which is our PMO, because we don't use the PMO here, or the master SharePoint site. And the same thing I'm doing also for the list. I'm checking, I hope you can read this better. I'm checking if this SharePoint list is not equal to PMO and not equal to the SharePoint list name that has triggered the workflow. I need to do that so that I can grab the third and last SharePoint site and list. And then I'm using these values here for the site address and the list name. I'm doing this so that I can grab the lastly created item of that third list. So again, if I create an item in the PMO marketing, I need to grab the ID of the last created item in my main list, which has happened after the syncing, update this list, and then grab the last created item in this third list, because I don't know which one that is, and its ID to update it, not to update its master ID. That's why I'm doing here the same thing for the last site and list, and grabbing its latest created item so that I can update that item. The ID that is coming from this get items to here, index 0 ID, and the item that I need to update is coming from, it's coming from this compose here. Okay, I hope that was not too complicated. It is a complicated workflow, so I hope that was understandable, and feel free to ask me questions in the comments. I will try to answer them all. It's a bit difficult to explain it from here, but let's take a look how it works. So I'm going to go back to that newly created item. I think it was here, PMO marketing. Yeah, there it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it and I'm going to say actions. So here it's loading the actions, and I can select, this is the workflow that I have created, and I can select start, and it says here that was the notification that we just wrote. Lists are syncing. You can close this and then we can go back to Power Automate. It says 24 seconds ago. It lasted 8 seconds, which is pretty fast, and it succeeded. So what happened here? I triggered this workflow from PMO marketing, and I initialized this variable with the list name, also the site name. It's here. We are initializing here the item ID as a variable. And here's our two static lists, one's for the sites and one's for the lists. Then we filtered here that SharePoint site out. In this case was this one here, Controls Marketing. And Controls Marketing is no longer in here anymore. And from a list as well, we have only PMO and PMO sales. Marketing is out. So now we know which two lists we need to update or create items in. So then we're going to apply to each. We have here only one item. So we are getting that item from that list where it was triggered from with its ID, so that we have then all the fields that we need. And by the way, when I created that JSON structure, which is here, generate item PMO or non-PMO, I just grabbed it from here. We have the structure, I just copy and pasted that, and instead of having the static values here, I replace them with dynamic values. And we have here this conditional item ID, and it is 0. Why it's 0? Because this one is blank, and I cannot pass a blank value, otherwise I get errors. That's why I write 0. So we have composed these actions here, or these records. And as you can see, we have here the information that I just wrote. This is for PMO, if it's going to be written in PMO. And this is for non-PMO lists, because we have here also the master ID column, which is in this case empty. And then it goes into this branch, get items for the second list and the third list. Let's take a look on this side because it's the same. So since it's searching here for ID equals 0, it doesn't exist, right? So the output is going to be empty. If I was to leave this blank, if I was not going to pass here anything, I will get here an error, because this will search for ID equals blank or nothing, and it will say that you cannot compare or you cannot do a filter query with blank values, of course. So it needs to have like an, in this case, integer. And that's why I'm searching for 0, because there are no 0 items or there are no 0 IDs. Okay, so the raw outputs are empty, as you can see here. And in the condition, I'm checking the length of these outputs, and if it's 0, then it will create an item. If not, it will update it. In my case, the item does not exist, so it will create an item. In this case, let me check this one as well. So in this case, we have created an item in both lists. This one is PMO, and this one is PMO sales. So since these conditions have not been met, we are going then here to get the items from the PMO, since we need that ID from that latest created item. And we do here an ID descending, top one, and to download this, you can see here in this JSON that we have the ID number 87. And that's, as you can see here, our latest item created. So we have now the ID of the latest item. Then we're generating this master ID. And as you can see here, it's grabbing the master ID from this one, from these get items. And then we're updating the two remaining SharePoint lists. One is the one from where Trigr has been triggered, the marketing, and the other one is the remaining after we filter. Now we have update here, it's master ID 87. Then we have filtered here from this list of SharePoint sites, the one which has been triggered from and the one we just updated. So we are left with one, sales and marketing. That's the site, that's the list, PMO sales. And I'm grabbing also the items from that list because I don't know, since it has been created, I don't know what its ID is. And I'm grabbing the latest item. So I know, okay, that's the latest created item, which I need to update its master ID. And then I'm passing here again this master ID value. And as you can see here, let me refresh the screen. This is where we created the item. It got now the master ID from our master list, which is 87. And it has been updated here as well, and also in this other third list as well. Again, it's a bit complicated, I know, and I hope I explained it as good as possible. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to share all the code snippets, everything that you need to recreate this solution. And if you have any questions on why or how, please let me know in the comments. I'm happy to answer them. And yeah, as I said, I hope you liked it. I hope this is helpful. I can think of very, very different scenarios where I'm going to use it. And please make sure that you take a look at Encodian. I will post the links all in the video description. Check them out. Create a free account. I think you have it for 30 days and play around with it, test it out, show it to your boss. Maybe they like it and they want to subscribe to that service. And then you can do so much more with their solution. I'm really happy this worked out. And yeah, again, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Give it a thumbs up if you like the video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you check Encodian and catch you on the next one. Bye.